Welcome back, word nerds. Mike here with the social life of language, making complex theories simple but never simplified. If you think that sounds cool, hit that subscribe button now. Today we're looking at an older but still very relevant piece by John Baugh entitled Linguistic Profiling, and it's a chapter found in this book. But I'm also going to be referring to a TED Talk John Baugh did in 2019 on the same topic. So that's over 15 years later, but it's still an extremely efficient form of racism because it appears as though we're talking about linguistic practice and not race. But let's be clear. When we talk about language, we are talking about people. Let's jump right into it. Page 155, he says, "The concept of linguistic profiling is introduced here as the auditory equivalent of racial profiling, and can have devastating consequences for those U.S. residents who are perceived to speak with an undesirable accent or dialect." He goes over a couple kinds of linguistic profiling, one that is discriminatory and another that he calls preferential linguistic profiling. Let's cover this one first and you'll see why later on. So preferential linguistic profiling might include something like thinking people with a British accent sound smart. Or if, let's say, a white child with a British accent is enrolled in a US school, no one is going to be correcting their pronunciation or saying that they gotta get rid of their accent. Although what this really means is they want the child to replace an accent with an American accent. But what does that mean? Now, in that first definition John Baugh provides, he says, profiling can have devastating consequences if you don't speak the right dialect or have the right accent. In the United States, we might call this right accent Standard American English, or we might call it Dominant American English. Or if we're being real with ourselves, we might call this the ability to speak a register of English that is widely perceived as attached to whiteness, as attached to white people, or the dominant group in American society. But we don't normally describe people as talking white, right? Wrong. Racialized populations get accused of sounding white all the time. Nevertheless, this idea of white voice appears to open up access to resources and opportunities. This was brilliantly displayed in that movie Sorry to Bother You, where an entire new world is opened up to this main character once he mastered the ability to speak in a white voice or a white standard register.
Hey, young blood, let me give you a tip. You want to make some money here? Then read the script with a white voice. I'm not talking about Will Smith's wife. I'm talking about the real deal.
Hey, Mr. Kramer. This is Langston from Regal View. I didn't catch you at the wrong time, did I?
But Mike, that's just a movie. Let's think about what this white voice actually does in American society. Let's think about Barack Obama. The way that he spoke was a constant focus in the news. I'm sure you remember those conversations or were even part of those conversations talking about, oh, Obama sounds white. Oh, no, Obama sounds black. Now, Joe Biden had something really interesting to say at the time.
Like everybody these days, Biden declared online, but it was old media that got him in trouble.
I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man.
Yeah.
Oh, another one. Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid.
According to a new book about the election, Reid said Obama should seek and could win the White House because he was, quote, a light-skinned African-American with no Negro dialect unless he wanted to have one.
John Baugh also says that we might engage in something like inclusive profiling, as in you might recognize someone that sounds the same as you and suddenly feel a connection with them, or feel a connection with a larger community. So the point is, people differentiate the sound of other people's voices all the time, of other people's grammatical usage all the time. But that does not necessarily result in discrimination. So these two versions of profiling, preferential and discriminatory have effects that are very different. In his new 2019 TED Talk, he tightens up his definition of linguistic profiling quite a bit. He says, linguistic profiling occurs when a person is denied access to otherwise available goods or services by phone, sight unseen, based exclusively on the sound of their voice. Meaning you differentiate based on sound and you act in a discriminatory way. Now this definition really clarified things for me, or more specifically, when should I use the phrase linguistic profiling? The author conducted this fascinating study on housing discrimination. He would call places to see if they had vacancies and would perform a non-white accent, and then call back and perform a dominant white American accent. Can you guess the results? They're exactly what you think. But this study was important because it provided empirical evidence to the courts that linguistic profiling was happening. Now, a simple no to a black voice and a yes to a white voice might be written off as chance, might be written off as a fluke. So uncovering a simple no-yes pattern is convincing, but he went further. First, he would call and perform a black voice. Then he would call and perform a brown voice or a Latinx voice. Then he would call and perform a white voice. Eventually, he uncovered a very stable no, yes pattern. That hardly looks like chance. That is racial profiling. In case you're wondering what he sounded like, let's hear John Baugh himself.
So I always use the phrase, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper, right? But for the purpose of this experiment, I had to modify my speech a little bit, you understand? So I would call and I say, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper, right? Or on another occasion, hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have advertised in the paper, right? The reason that I never used my professional voice first is because I was looking for a pattern of rejection, acceptance, right? Had I called first using my professional voice, they could have easily said, oh, someone's coming to look at the apartment, and I wouldn't have been able to detect the pattern of discrimination that we see here.
Now, the majority of this article is about linguistic profiling in the legal system. Now, of course, housing discrimination is illegal, but linguistic profiling is still used in devastating ways to persons of color. And these profiles are necessarily built on racial stereotypes. But people change the way they speak depending on the context. I speak differently here than I do with, let's say, my mom or something. But linguistic profiling is just as damaging and just as dangerous and just as racist as racial profiling. I would say that racial profiling and linguistic profiling are two sides of the same white supremacist coin. But man, is linguistic profiling easy to get away with.
So can you tell us in the video, please, why you ask us for our IDs, please?
Ma'am, the reason I asked you for your ID is because I came in here and I saw that you guys are speaking Spanish, which is very unheard of up here.
Okay.
Just write your name, date of birth.
We have absence. Just because our profile, right?
No.
Racial profile.
It has nothing to do with that.
No.
It's the fact that it has to do with you guys speaking Spanish in the store.
Spanish in the store.
In the state where it's predominantly English speaking.
Okay.
So observe the claim of this Border Patrol officer. He is claiming it has nothing to do with race. But by the very practice of speaking Spanish, this person becomes an object of suspicion. What does that sound like? Racial profiling. I bet that guy has only ever asked Spanish speakers for ID. I doubt he has ever asked a person with a British accent for documentation. He's probably never asked a guy speaking French for documentation. To read more on discrimination against the bilinguals, I highly recommend this other article by Celia Zentella, where she talks about TWB, talking while bilingual. Yes, it's a play on that phrase. It's excellent work that focuses on how bilingual speakers are profiled by others as always talking behind people's backs or wanting to start trouble. And eventually, those bilinguals get fired from their jobs, even when they were hired for their bilingual skills specifically. Now, sadly, most of the legal cases in this work are about Black American workers reporting their bilingual coworkers. But you gotta read the whole article because these cases are very complex. The citation is below. Well, that's all for today, folks. I have some work being published very soon, so make sure you follow me on academia.edu. And do think about donating to my Patreon account. Once again, I'm Mike, and you're watching The Social Life of Language. And we're done.